Good morning and welcome to another edition of Our Town here on 94.9 and 99.1 The River. My name is Darren Swenson. Our Town, as always, brought to you by Decorah Bank and Trust. Got three guests on the program this morning, all interesting topics, all interesting people to talk to. A little bit later on in the program, we will talk to Scott Siepker. He is the producer of the new Niall Kinnick documentary, and that documentary will be aired beginning at the Fridley Theaters in Decorah on Friday night. We'll get the insight on that documentary and some other projects that Scott is involved in and hope to come to fruition here in the not too distant future. This week was the start of Iowans having the ability to request absentee ballots through the mail. And we'll talk about the new voting laws, what you need to know prior to November 8th, which will be here before we know it. And Ben Stienes, Winneshiek County Auditor, will be our guest on that end of things. But our first guest this morning, first time in 3 years, Winneshiek Medical Center is going to be holding their community picnic tonight. And we'll talk about the community picnic, the event itself, and other things going on at Winneshiek Medical Center with the medical center's chief medical officer, Dr. Tom Marquardt. And that conversation begins our program this morning. This is Our Town, brought to you by Decorah Bank and Trust on 94.9 and 99.1 The River. Having a conversation with the chief medical officer at Winneshiek Medical Center, Dr. Thomas Marquardt, and joining us. And tonight, the community picnic returns to Winneshiek Medical Center. And Dr. Marquardt, I know the way the world is, you haven't been able to have this event the last couple of years, but how good does it feel for everybody at Winneshiek Medical Center to invite the community back for a community event?
You know, Darren, thanks for the question and thanks for the time today. There's a lot going on here at Winneshiek Medical Center, and as you highlight, tonight we will be hosting our community picnic. The community picnic is something that we started back at our centennial celebration, which was back in 2014. So this will be the 8th year in which we've had the opportunity to do the community picnic. Back in 2014, it was just a wild success. We saw many individuals from the community come out to support the activities here at the medical center. In a very similar way this year, we're going to be sponsoring that with a meal for families that come, and all kinds of activities for kids and families to participate in. In the past, we've had the helicopter here. There will be some emergency vehicles available for families and kids to view as well. But again, going back to the genesis of this, we were celebrating our centennial in 2014. We had to take a couple of years off because of COVID, much like what you had suggested. And so it's exciting for us to be able to get back together and host this event for our local community.
And what are the hours for the event tonight?
So it's tonight, Thursday, September 1st, and it's from 4 until 7.
And the meal activities, everything like that, any charge to show up today?
Yeah, so barbecue pork sandwiches, chips, beverages, live music from Mike Maccabee. There'll be some opportunity to tour some emergency vehicles. There will be kids' games and activities, opportunities to tour the garden here, and popcorn from the Lions Club, and the Moo Mobile will also be here. I think there's a small charge for the Moo Mobile shakes at $1 a shake. But those other activities are certainly going to be available as well. The sustainable garden that we have is something we're very proud of, and if you haven't had a chance to take a look at that, it's absolutely beautiful, and we do use produce from that garden for our cafeteria. So that's something we've been doing for years, and having an opportunity to see that, I think, would be kind of neat as well.
And how important is it for a medical center in a community to just kind of have that cultivating relationship? You haven't been able to do it publicly, I know, for the last couple of years, but making sure that the community knows what's going on at the medical center and vice versa, how important is that to you?
Well, it's huge. I think, you know, as healthcare consumers, one of the things that people look for is they look for that care to be local. And that's one of the things that we're very proud of here at Winneshiek Medical Center, is that we are able to provide a full spectrum of healthcare services here locally. We hear from our our consumers of healthcare, how much they appreciate being able to seek that care close to home. And that's for all kinds of reasons. There's convenience. There are things like parking and getting into the facility and exiting the facility. And then if and when people need those hospitalizations or they need those surgeries, whatever they might be, to be able to do that care much closer to home has huge advantage. And so we want to make sure that our community knows that that is important, and we want to support that the best way that we can. And certainly a community picnic and kind of this opportunity to come on campus, if you will, and see the facility and understand perhaps some of the services that are here, and just our physical presence, I think has value to support that notion of healthcare local. So the community picnic serves in that capacity as well.
Related to that, earlier this year, the Board of Trustees commissioned a community health needs assessment. And what did you find out when that assessment was taken? And what does the board, yourself as part of the administrative team, everybody at Winneshiek Medical Center, do with that information moving forward?
Yeah, that's great. A really great question. And we do use that information that we gain from that community health needs assessment. And one of the biggest things, and this probably comes as no surprise because this is really more of a national concern and a national crisis, if you will, and that is the need for mental health care. That was probably one of the top priorities that we learned through that community needs health assessment. Along with that, older adult care rose to the top as an opportunity for improvement for us. Availability of services and access. Those are really the top things that we learned from that particular assessment. And those are things that will guide our actions as we continue to provide healthcare locally. There are lots of actionable items that we have in place to try to address those concerns that were brought forward. And some of those things are things that we were already doing, but we need to build on. And then some of them will also benefit from our what we call our Transforming Tomorrow project. Transforming Tomorrow really references the building project that we've been working on. We're currently working with our local board here, and we're in the construction design phase of that. And as these projects roll out, they roll out in a staged fashion. And at this point, things continue to move forward with that project. But that project will also address some of those needs that we learned through that community health assessment that you reference.
And related to that project, what at least initially is the medical center planning to add related to the physical presence at the facility and the services provided at the facility moving forward? Has that been determined?
Yeah, it has. And there's really basically three areas that are going to benefit from this project. Of course, those spill out into other aspects of the organization, but there's a huge priority to update our OB space. Our OB space is long overdue for an update, and one of the big parts of this project is to renovate that OB space. A second part of the project is working in our surgical area. We're going to expand our surgery or OR rooms by one, and then also where we do our instrumentation cleaning is part of that project. So there'll be a big portion of that that'll be renovated in the surgical realm. And then the third part is our clinical space. We're going to have essentially new space for our clinic that is on campus, and that houses our primary care physicians and team, and then our specialty care physicians and their teams as well. And so that clinical space is probably where you will see some of the activity that helps support the needs that we learned through the community health assessment, specifically access, care to our access to our providers, I guess. And specifically in the mental health realm, we have been participating and building a program that's called IBH, or Integrated Behavioral Health. And integrated behavioral health is an opportunity to provide that mental health care need in a much more expeditious way than maybe we have provided that care in the past. And so again, that clinical space allows us to address some of that. And then the clinical space allows for access. Again, access is a huge issue for us, and we want to try to provide easier and better access to our physician providers here at the medical center.
When is the construction planned to start on this project?
Tentatively scheduled for the first of next year, January, February of 2023. It's a staged project, of course, in the order in which I shared earlier, kind of starting with OB and trying to complete that in an expeditious way, then followed by surgery, then followed by the clinic. But again, a scheduled start on that is the first part of 2023.
Anything else you want to pass on from the Winneshiek Medical Center perspective, as long as you got the forum this morning?
Well, thank you for that opportunity. Again, I think, there's a long, rich history here at Winneshiek Medical Center. As a leader of the organization, I'm very proud to have that opportunity to try to move the ball down the field, so to speak. There's lots of history here. There's lots of future here. And again, I think we really want to focus on the needs of the patient and providing that care locally. And we are so appreciative of the support that we get from our local community and from those who seek care here at the medical center. It's absolutely a partnership, and for us to be able to provide that care here locally is truly a privilege and truly an honor, and we're thankful for that opportunity.
One thing I didn't touch on related to the upgrade, from what I understand, there's some federal dollars that are going to be helping you out with this upgrade, because to upgrade a facility, it costs money, and any way you can finance that and not put it on the taxpayer, I'd imagine is a good thing.
Absolutely. Thanks for that question. We are seeking funding and financing through a USDA loan. It's a long-term loan with a great interest rate comparatively or competitively. And so one of the large funding sources is through a loan of that nature.
And I'll let you give you a chance to give one final invitation to the community picnic coming up tonight.
Yeah, well, thank you. Again, right now the weather is awesome. It's a beautiful September day and September evening, as they usually are. We have been fairly lucky with that. And so it's a great opportunity to come down here to the medical center, see what's happening down here, as we shared earlier, and grab that free meal, so to speak, for the family, if you would like. And again, we want to really kind of express the open campus that we have here as a community resource and a community partner. So thank you.
All right, Dr. Tom Marquardt joining us, the Chief Medical Officer at Winneshiek Medical Center. Community picnic coming up tonight. Appreciate the time, Tom, and appreciate everything and that everybody does at Winneshiek Medical Center to make Decorah a great place to live.
Thank you.
Dr. Tom Marquardt from Winneshiek Medical Center. Having a conversation this morning with Winneshiek County Auditor Ben Stienes, and believe it or not, we're only a couple of months away from Election Day 2022. And reason we wanted to get Ben on this morning, there's a lot of issues or a lot of discussion about election laws, and a lot of it is focused on a national level. And frankly, we don't talk enough, and I'll take my share of the blame of this, of what the laws are here locally. The reason it popped into my mind this week, Ben, if you want an absentee ballot, you can request one here in the state of Iowa as of this week, correct?
That's correct. This week started the absentee by mail request time. So you can request a ballot by mail anytime now. This week is also, we're still doing candidate filings. So we don't even know who will all be on the ballot yet until later this week. They'll be filing this week, and then they have a few days to withdraw or do challenges to their filings or things. So next week we'll actually be working on getting the ballots ordered. Those ballots that are requested to be mailed out, which you can request them now, there will not be any ballots mailed out or voted until October 19th. That's the start date for all early voting methods. So If you request an absentee ballot now and you don't get it for a few weeks, you're not supposed to till October 19th. You don't need to send another request form.
And that is a change based on a law passed last year by the Iowa legislature, correct?
That's correct. There have been actually several changes over the last half dozen years or so in some of those timing deadlines as far as when we start voting, when we mail ballots out, and so on. So suffice it to say, they keep kind of playing with the deadlines, but just so everyone knows, October 19th is the date that we are starting. That'll be the day we put all of the requested ballots so far in the mail, and we'll also be starting to vote in our office early that day.
And I know it's a shorter time this year. And are there any changes when it comes to the hours on election day that people can show up at the polls and vote based on the legislation that was passed this past session?
Yeah, so in 2021, they did pass a bill that changed the closing time for polls for some elections. So in Iowa, prior to 2021, polls would close at 8 p.m. for all elections except those that had a federal race on the ballot. Then those polls would be open till 9. And so in 2021, the bill that passed, it standardized everything. It was we're always closed at 8 p.m. So we always open at 7 a.m. and always close at 8 p.m. For election day voting.
And related to the folks that are requesting an absentee ballot through the mail, how do they do so?
Yep, there's a form, absentee ballot request form. It's available on the county's website, winneshiekcounty.iowa.gov, or on the Secretary of State's website. We have them in our office to be picked up. There are several voter advocacy groups that will mail them out. There are candidates and political parties that mail them out. So it's not usually very hard to get the application form. So the important part is that you read through it to make sure you know what you're signing, that you sign it, and that you put your driver's license number or voter PIN number on the form. Those are the required things that you need to fill out.
And that's a good point with the voter ID law that was passed a few years ago. The voter ID law kind of applies to the absentee situation related to this, correct?
Yep, to the extent that it is required for the voter to list their, like I said, their driver's license number, or if they don't have a driver's license or a permit or a non-driver ID card issued by the DOT, they would have been assigned a voter PIN number to use instead. So it is required for the voters to put that on the form themselves. That will not be pre-filled in by any of the groups or people that you may get a form from.
Obviously, most folks use their driver's license as their ID when they go to the polls. For the folks that don't have a driver's license, what do they do?
Right. So they shouldn't have to do anything. So anytime we have a voter registration where we can't verify the voters information with the DOT, so they don't have a driver's license or non-driver ID card with the DOT, then we automatically send them a voter ID card that has a PIN number and a signature blank on it. Also important to just maybe to mention is that even if you have a driver's license and you let it expire after a couple months, we send you a voter ID card anyway, because we want to make sure you can vote even if your driver's license is expired. So this is a wake-up call for those of you out there that if you get a voter ID card and you weren't expecting to get one, check the expiration date on your driver's license.
And head on up to the treasurer's office if necessary too.
That's right.
So, and related to voter registration, let's say somebody has recently moved, maybe it's just across town or from the city limits to the county or vice versa. When it comes to the folks that move since the last general election, what do they do?
Right. So we have, I think it's 32, I haven't counted with our new districts, but we have 32 different ballot styles depending on where you live. Actually, with the last redistricting, it might even be a couple more. But if you live in the city limits of one of our 8 cities in Winneshiek County, then you have a different ballot than people who live in the township, because they have to elect township trustees and township clerks. And within the city of Decorah, there are several wards that further divide up the people who live in town. So it ends up being many different ballot styles. So when you move, we need to make sure we get you the correct ballot style for where you currently live. And if you report that change of address before October 24th, so that's the deadline. It's called the early registration deadline. So if you report it before October 24th, you can be issued a ballot just by telling us what the new address is on a new voter registration form or something like that. If it's after October 24th, then we are going to require proof of residency that shows that you do live at that new address.
And related to the whole issue of election security, I know this gets talked about a lot, but I know Iowa is kind of a model for a lot of the nation.
Yeah.
You say that as a proud Iowan myself, and I'm being 100% biased there. I know when it comes to drawing redistricting maps, Iowa kind of sets the standard related to that. And I remembered having a conversation a few years ago with the Secretary of State, Paul Pate, and he had a good line that people in Moscow, Iowa can vote in Iowa election. Nobody in Moscow, Russia has voted in an Iowa election. How confident are you that the votes here in the state of Iowa are as secure as they possibly can be?
Yes, Iowa does kind of set the gold standard in keeping elections secure, as well as still making it not putting up barriers for people who can legally cast ballots to get those ballots cast. So another line I think I've heard the Secretary of State use is we want it to be easy to vote, just not easy to cheat. So we try to provide, like you said, we're starting our absentee voting. We got 20 days to do that ahead of the election time. We have voting in person and by mail. We have a lot of options to get your ballot cast with the 13 hours of election time on election day. But at the same time, we do have some laws that help to preserve the security. So the voter ID, which we talked about here a few minutes ago, that law has been in place now for a couple of election cycles. And so people are kind of getting used to that process. But like I mentioned before, if you don't have a driver's license or a voter or a non-driver ID card, you automatically are issued a voter ID card to use when you vote. So there isn't an extra step or extra barrier to get that card. So everyone should have the required information when they vote. As far as some of the other things that are talked about nationwide, one of the things that we're proud of here is that, well, a couple of things we're proud of here is that our voting equipment is never connected to the internet. So there is absolutely no way for anyone from another country to get into the programming of our voting equipment. That's just one of our rules. We never connect it to the internet. So that way we don't even have to worry about that. Another thing that not all states do, but that we still maintain a complete paper record of the election. Every person who votes has a ballot that is bagged up and secured and locked up for 22 months, and to give time to make sure there are no scandals related to the election. We can always go back, we could go back and do a recount or a challenged election or something if there were other things going on, and we have paper backups to all of those electronic records. So those are two of the key parts of keeping the security in place.
As someone who's directly involved in elections, like 98 of your colleagues across the state of Iowa are, I know there's maybe a little bit of a fine line between advocacy in encouraging some laws to be changed, but at the same time, whatever the laws are, you guys have to adjust to them, and that's the way you move forward. Where is that fine line between you and your fellow county auditors, making sure that, you know, hey, if we do this thing, it might be a little less of a headache for the voters and for ourselves, but at the same time, just kind of rolling with the punches?
Right. So I'm usually in contact with our local legislators, as well as some of the other legislators on the state government committees, is where election laws usually get addressed at the state house. And so I try to let them know my opinion on election bills when they come up. If they seem to be partisan type bills or bills that are more driven by politics, I usually just say that I don't usually comment on those types of bills. I know that some of my other auditor colleagues are more vocal than I am when it comes to those things, but I am very much an advocate for efficiency and ease of running the election and voting issues. So anytime they have a bill that they may not have really thought about the consequences to the administration of the election, or the what effect it might have on the ability for people to get their vote cast quickly and efficiently, I am very vocal about those things. So if it means that someone's gonna have to fill out an extra form or stand in line longer or whatever, I make sure that I tell the legislators that this is one of the effects you have to be sure you realize could happen from a bill. So I am pretty vocal when it comes to that.
Anything we're missing regarding what folks need to know about the new election laws here in the state of Iowa? Anything else you want to pass on to people?
Yeah, I mentioned that October 24th deadline earlier. That was the registration deadline. So you can get registered to vote by that date without showing additional identification. After that date, you do have to show some additional identification, but also important is that is the last day to request a ballot by mail. So you can start requesting them now this week up until October 24th. After that date, you can no longer request them by mail, but you could still vote in our office early or on election day. So that's important that people know that that deadline has, they have adjusted that date some over the last few legislative cycles, basically to try to accommodate the fact that the delivery and return by the post office is not always as quick as some people wish it was. So we want to make sure that we aren't mailing ballots out to people that it's not realistic that they have time to return them. Also changed in that 2021 election bill is the return deadline for ballots. So now for all regular issued absentee ballots, whether you're voting in person or through the mail, they all have to be received in the office before the close of polls on election day. So we do not no longer honor a date, post stamp date as being on time. It has to be received by the close of polls on election day. And that also has been something that changed for a couple of reasons. One, we were having less reliably dated mail. So we might get several ballots returned within the day or two after an election, and some we could count because they were dated appropriately, and some we couldn't because they weren't. So to make it fair, we just gave everyone the same deadline. And the other reason that I like that change is that when we publish our results on the night of the election, there are very few things that could still change those results then at that point. There's few things like there are provisional ballots or ballots mailed by overseas civilians or active duty military that could still get some extra time. But for the most part, results on election night are the results.
And then that change regarding when absentee ballots can be received was kind of stemmed from the state house race that our area went through a few years ago, correct?
That's right. That came out of that 2018 general election where we experienced firsthand the flaws in the old postmark dating system, because the Winneshiek County received 29, I think was the magic number in that election, ballots after election day that were not postmark dated. So we couldn't determine when they were mailed, and if they were mailed on time or not. And so that resulted in lawsuits and judges getting involved, and it finally ended up at the state legislature to resolve it. And then after having to do that, resolve that issue, they immediately then addressed the law change so that there was no longer this gray area in that.
All right, Ben, we appreciate you taking some time to tell election laws to you. You obviously are on top of things, and we appreciate you telling us and the public what we need to know prior to November. I know it seems like a ways off, but it'll be here before we know it, and you'll be counting ballots on November 8th here in no time. We thank you for the time.
I actually have one more comment, if I may. I failed to mention it earlier, but this is being a year that ends with 2. Following the census, we go through a redistricting process, and so this is the first year that people are in the new districts that were assigned after the census of 2020. So what I really want to mention to the public is that could mean that you have to vote at a different location than you did 2 years ago. So we will be sending a mailing to each household that has registered voters in the county, telling them where you vote under the new precinct system. So some people may be the same place where they're used to, but many will be changed to a different location. So be sure to watch for that. Talk to us in the auditor's office if you don't know for sure where you need to go to vote.
All right, good reminder there, Ben. We appreciate the time. Thanks for telling us what we need to know, and I'm sure we'll be in touch between now and November 8th.
Yeah, sounds good. Thank you.
Winneshiek County Auditor Ben Stienes. Beginning Friday night at the Fridley Theaters in Decorah, it will be one of many Fridley Theater locations throughout the state of Iowa that will be airing Kinnick, the documentary, and the man who put it together is Scott Siepker, and he joins us on Our Town this morning. Scott, tell us how this project came together. Where'd you get the idea to put this project together? How long has it been since the idea first started, and reality put everything together into the final production?
Well, I'll try and keep it to be a bit short, but about 10 years ago, we had a viral hit called Iowa Nice that came out on YouTube that changed the course of my career and my life. And trying to figure out what we're going to do for a follow-up, threw a lot of ideas out there. One of them was a mutual documentary on Jack Trice and Niall Kinnick. At the time, we weren't really ready as a film crew to put together a feature-length film. And so that idea sort of morphed into what was our official follow-ups to Iowa Nice, Cyclone Nice, and Hawkeye Nice. Those videos came out. ESPN picked them up. We ended up being on ESPN for 2 years, continued to grow our film group. And then about 6 years ago, we felt like we actually had the platform and the know-how, as naive as we were, to be able to pull off a feature-length film. Pretty quickly into filming, realized we had way too much material to do a Jack and Niall combo documentary. Ended up splitting them into 2, decided to pursue the Kinnick one first. While the Jack one is about half done, we saw the Kinnick one to the finish line here, and that kind of catches you up to today.
And when you take a story of probably one of the most well-known residents of the state of Iowa in history, and Niall Kinnick, everyone knows the history of him as a football player, and many people know the history of him and his military service. How do you go about putting together a documentary and getting stories that aren't well known to most Iowans that are even familiar with the story?
Well, we started with the great books that have been written about Niall previously. And like one of them I have, let's see here. So Hero Parish, which I recommend everybody get. There are a couple of D.W. Stump's book, and then Tom Lidd wrote a dramatized version, a novel about Niall's life called Niall. And so we started there with those texts and then reached out to any of the experts that were still around. So we have Tom Lidd in the movie. We have a gentleman named Mike Chapman, who's one of our historians as well, who's written about Niall. We started with them, and then we also wanted to find, just hopefully we could find somebody who was still alive who knew Niall. And then we came across Don Bice, Niall's first cousin, who's still alive in his mid-90s. And no one's ever really sat him down and had an extensive interview with him before. And so he was there with Niall in a dell, grew up with them, caught passes and punts from Niall. He's about 8-ish years younger than Niall, roughly the same age as Niall's youngest brother, George. And so George and Don palled around, helped Niall practice. And so we started there, gathered all that information, got what we needed on film, and then scanned the landscape to find out what questions hadn't been answered and what now could we add to the story of Niall Kinnick that hasn't been answered yet.
And so often when we have these figures like Niall Kinnick, like any well-known individual, us in media, we treat these people as two-dimensional characters. Kinnick is a guy that, knowing the history that I do, and I'm looking forward to watching the film to learn more, he's the kind of the ultimate multi-dimensional guy. Would you agree?
He's a Renaissance man. Besides, he only spoke one language, but if he wanted to, he probably could have learned every language. I'm being a bit hyperbolic, but his mind was incredible. And he had a wonderful family that really set the foundation for that. His grandfather was governor of Iowa. And so they sat around as an extended family and talked about poetry and the local news and national news and even world news. And so, yeah, he had the mind and the physical aspects to be able to do almost anything, and add that to this Excelsior theme of his life, this almost motto of the family to achieve, push, go ever higher, always upwards. And he's somebody that we really can look up to. We could look up to him back then, and he's still relevant today. And I think he will be relevant moving forward as well.
And I know I want people to go see the film, and I don't want to give away any spoilers here, but how much did your knowledge on Niall Kinnick grow throughout this entire process?
I grew up in rural Carroll County, so real tiny town. Growing up, I knew Niall like the bullet points that you kind of listed out earlier, but I didn't know what was in between the bullet points or what was the foundation of those bullet points. And gosh, we just learned so much about him. A lot of people, almost all of us, will be lucky if we get remembered for one thing. I think it might be Doris Kearns said, like presidents at best get remembered for 3 things. Mm-hmm. And so what chance do the rest of us have? So even somebody as accomplished and incredible as Niall, what most people know, Heisman, great football player, good speech, maybe they know about the service, maybe they know about his grandfather being governor, things like that. But everything else in between there, as I've been telling people, this film is 90 minutes long. I think for 87 minutes, you're learning something new about Niall. You're getting to know him. One of the greatest compliments that we've gotten on this film is that we have brought Niall back to life as best as somebody can this many decades after his passing. And that gives me goosebumps, because that's what we want to do. We want to remind people that he's not just a bronze statue. He's a flesh and blood man with flaws and quirks. And I think those reminders of his imperfections make the greatness that he stands for to be even more inspirational.
This is a speculative question. Had he not passed away at a very, very early age, what would he have gone on to do?
I will preface my answer by saying, of course we don't know. Life always takes turns that we cannot even foresee in any way. But I do think it is responsible to say that his potential was being a really well-known politician. And I go so far as to say that his potential, his ceiling is president of the United States. His floor, if he decided to get into politics, which all of his writings pretty much lead you to that conclusion, like that's the thing he wanted to do. I mean, he was already, after his Heisman year, he was already on the campaign trail for presidential candidates. He was with Wendell Willkie. He was campaigning against FDR and for Willkie. Like, he was not shying away from not sticking to sports, to use a modern phrase. He just wasn't a guy who stuck to sports. And with his his grandfather's pedigree in politics, his good looks, his fame, people don't realize Niall Kinnick was one of the most famous Americans in 1939. One commentator at the time said that he was competing with Shirley Temple to be America's favorite new personality. Like, it's incredible. So he had the fame, he had the intellect, he had the looks, he had the speaking ability and the writing ability. And as we all hope in our politicians, he has good morals and ethics. And so I will give a quick example about why I don't think this is insane for me to be saying that he could have been president. One, Ronald Reagan thought the same thing. We opened the film with him reporting that to one of our experts. But Niall had to make a crash landing in the water in World War II, and so did George H.W. Bush. Niall served on the USS Lexington. Once H.W. Bush made his water landing, crash landing, he was picked up by a submarine, and that submarine took him to be rescued by a ship, and that ship was the USS Lexington. And I think you can see how both of their lives could have had parallel paths. Niall had everything you would want to have in a president. At the very least, he would have been, I think, again, this is speculative, as you said, but I think it's pretty easy to see senator from the state of Iowa is absolutely within his grasp, just from his popularity alone. But then you add in all these other things. And as the old expression goes, no senator wakes up and doesn't look in the mirror each morning and see a president. So you can extrapolate out. And I just think Niall would have gone on to serve his country really well. And can you imagine if in 1960 or even through the 70s, if the darling of the Republican Party was Niall Clark Kinnick Jr. instead of Richard M. Nixon?
Very interesting to discuss. And I know just the way the world is with all sorts of information out there, all sorts of media out there, we're probably more of a bitter, jaded, cynical world than we probably should be. Is a Niall Kinnick type personality possible today?
I think for sure. Because the things that he stood for, like being ethical, being moral, being a good sibling, being a good son, being a great friend, a giving teammate, all of those things are, they're almost universal. And you don't have to be blessed with great athleticism to pull those things off. You don't have to be born into a family that sits around and talks about geopolitics for you to pull those things off. I think that's the true inspiration for Niall, is that the things he would want his legacy to be are those things I listed out. And we can all do that stuff. That is stuff that we can do today and tomorrow and moving on into the future. And as Bill Cunningham from the Boston Post wrote after Niall's Heisman speech, like, this country will be better off if it keeps producing Niall Kinnicks. And that, I'm paraphrasing Bill's quote there, but that's true. The more we can be like Niall Kinnick, the better I think we're all going to be off.
And you mentioned you're working on a Jack Trice documentary as well, and that's probably a story that we don't know as much of as Iowans, at least I don't, but it's probably a story that in today's day and age needs to be told and needs to be, and I think it would resonate with a lot of people in today's day and age, knowing the fact of what Jack Trice dealt with as an Iowa State football player. Yeah,
Jack's story is a remarkable one. and I'm really looking forward to being able to share that story with people. There are some challenges. Jack is a generation prior to Niall, so there's less records. Jack being the first Black athlete at Iowa State, it obviously creates a situation where there's less records as well. So we've had to do a lot more primary research. I mean, we did a ton on the Niall stuff, but we have spent a lot of time led by Brendan Dunphy on our team. They spent a lot of time in Hiram, Ohio, his hometown, digging through microfiche, going to Cleveland, visiting there a couple times. I mean, Jack's story didn't all take place pretty much around here. Niles mostly did. They ended up in Omaha for his final times in high school, but for the most part, it takes place in Omaha and here in Iowa until he gets in the military. Then it expands out, of course. But Jack's life starts in Ohio and then comes over here, and so there's just a lot more geographical ground to cover in that sense for his early life. So we're doing all that. I think Jack had one of the most wonderful smiles I've ever seen of a person. And I think those photos that you can see now on Google of this magnetic smile tells you can just tell there's a gentleness there, but a power. And I think, Jack, we lost Jack so early. We don't know. And because we don't have the plethora of writings that we have from Niall, we don't know exactly what Jack was planning, other than probably wanting he was in animal husbandry, and so probably getting into agriculture more deeply. There's just so much he could have been, and what a lost Jack's story is. But Jack's story is also emblematic in the story of the more than 20-year struggle of how the stadium got its name in Ames. And so his story will be interwoven with that more than 20-year struggle. And so I'm really excited for the storytelling opportunities that we can bring to the Jack Trice documentary. The Niall one, that story, we tried a bunch of different ways. It wanted to be told chronologically. And so we eventually had to acquiesce and be like, okay, It needs to be told chronologically. Jack's story is not that way. And so we'll be able to just use some more storytelling devices to really bring out, and hopefully we'll be able to bring Jack back alive all these years later.
And looking at it from an overall state perspective, like when we say Kinnick Stadium, when we say Jack Trice Stadium, sometimes we just view it as a location and we view it at arm's distance. But you look at the men behind the names of those stadiums, and now you could probably add Duke Slater, since Duke Slater Field at now Kinnick Stadium. Is there a state in the nation that has such a rich story behind the men that these college football cathedrals are named after?
No, that's a short answer. The longer answer is all the other stadiums, most of them are either named for wealthy donors or school administrators or big time sponsors who have just given a bunch of money to have their company name on the side of those stadiums. But in Iowa, we have 2 college athletes, each who have died before the age of 25 on our stadiums. I think that's something to be proud of. I think it says something about us as Iowans. And I think it's also important to ask ourselves, who are our heroes and why do we pick those people as our heroes? And I hope that kind of gets answered in the Niall Kinnick documentary. And then it also is kind of answered in the Jack Trice documentary. I don't ever want to presume those answers. And so these films are not about evangelizing. So I leave that question open to the viewer to what they take away from it. But both Jack and Niall, even though they died so young, they can be people that we aim to emulate. And I think having them on the sides of our stadiums in name form is, I think it's important.
And I know as a producer of these documentaries, it's not a case of time. You want to tell the story in the right way. Do you have a timeline on the Jack Trice documentary, or is that an unfair question of me to ask?
No. I appreciate you asking, because a lot of people are asking me about the Jack Trice film, which is really that it's a great compliment that people want to see us see that to completion. The reason the Nile Kinnick project took so long was because of a lack of funding. That, just to be frank with you. And so the way we will get the Jack Trice film done is by getting a fully funded budget so that I could be paying my team, to work on it for, 40 hours a week to borrow a phrase. And that way this will take months and not years. There is still some filming we need to do right now. The rough plan, this is not official. Obviously we got to fundraise, but soon here, after the Kinnick stuff starts to die down, I'll turn my attention to fundraising. And then we have some stuff that we need to film this summer. Then it's the 100th anniversary of Jack's death, a year from October. That stuff, because the Jack story is a lot about his legacy as much as his life, we need to capture that stuff. So I'm aiming, of course, things change in this business, but I'm aiming for a 2024 Trice release.
And we mentioned that the Kinnick documentary will be shown at Fridley Theaters, including the Fridley Theaters in Decorah, beginning on Friday night. What are some other ways people can view the Kinnick documentary? It'll
be shown in Decorah. It'll be, I just told, breaking here for you, Darren, it'll play for at least 2 weeks in Decorah. All right. So that's great. Although, you know what, I shouldn't tell you that. Hey, everybody, it's going to be 1 week, so rush out to the theater now and fill that thing up. And then maybe we could get a third or fourth week out of it. But I recommend people see it in the theater. There's a communal experience that goes into this. I think it feels special. It feels more special than seeing it at home. However, this was intended for streaming on your televisions at home. That's the way we filmed it. And that was the way we wrote it. That was the intention. And so it is a wonderful viewing experience at home, which you can do now on Vimeo. Vimeo is on most smart TVs now. If it's not already pre-downloaded onto your television, just search your app store or however you get your apps for Vimeo, and then just search Kinnick. It'll come up. It's doing really well on Vimeo. And so you check it out there. It's $19.99. And so that's where you can see it now. There will be other things in the coming months that will be options for people as well. But if you want to see it now, and I, of course, recommend you see it now, go to the theater. Go to the theater, go see it there. And then if you can't, get it at home, and you can watch it. You purchase it there, and you can watch it as many times as you want after you buy it. So those are the ways that people can see it at this time.
Anything we're missing? Anything else you want to pass on about the Kinnick documentary or the plans for the Jack Trice documentary?
I just appreciate everybody who's helping us spread the word, who's watching it and getting out and telling their friends. We have a $0 marketing budget. And so to see this film take off the way it is because Iowans are helping us. And that's why I decided to stay in Iowa to be an actor and filmmaker, is because of Iowans. And that's why I didn't want to move to Los Angeles or New York. I would rather be in a place where I can complain about the weather instead of the traffic. So I just appreciate everybody who's helping us out and experiencing this film. And to be honest with you, this theatrical success, we were #1 in the Des Moines market, the Des Moines box office this last week. We were on one screen. I was not expecting that. I was not expecting us to be every corner of the state calling me and asking, can we have it in our town? And it speaks to the power of Nile. And I think one of the directors of the film, Paul Benedict, often says that Iowa is really good about lifting up the good. And I think we're seeing that now. Nile is one of our greatest people. And I think that people are helping us raise this up. So go see it in the theater if you can, watch it at home, do both. The more we can make a profitable film, to be crass with you, the more it's easier for us to make more films. And there's so many stories I want to tell from the state of Iowa. And these aren't rah-rah Hawkeye. It's not a rah-rah film for the Hawkeyes, for the university, or for the state. When you see it, it comes at it from a national perspective. But that's how we can get people from the nation to see these great Iowa films. And so I want to do a Kate Shelley movie. I want to do a Duke Slater documentary. I want to do Jack Trice, Johnny Bright, Bob Feller. I mean, I could go on and on and on. Henry A. Wallace. There's so many great stories in Iowa. Like, this is the first step in increasing the probability of making more of those.
Scott, we appreciate you taking the time. congratulations on the success of the Kinnick documentary to this point and continued success that you will have. Most people probably recognize you as the Iowa nice guy, and in our 20-minute conversation, you're definitely that. We thank you for taking the time and continued success in what you're doing and showcasing the great people from this state.
Well, Darren, I genuinely appreciate you having me on. Thank you so much.
Scott Siepker, he is the producer of the Kinnick documentary. Friday night will be shown at the Fridley Theaters in Decorah. Thank you to our guest on the program, Dr. Tom Marquardt, Chief Medical Officer at Winneshiek Medical Center. Community picnic coming up tonight, 4 until 7. Well, if it's your night to cook, it's a free meal. Head on out to Winneshiek Medical Center. The way the world is, they haven't been able to have that for the last couple of years, but tonight, it's back and it's ready to go. I want to thank Winneshiek County Auditor Ben Stienes for giving us all the information, what you need to know about voting, because you know what? November 8th will be here before we know it. You can request an absentee ballot through the mail as of right now. You won't be able to return it until October 19th. Also, that's when the absentee balloting will open up at your county auditor's office. And really enjoyed the conversation this morning with Scott Siepker. Many people know him as the Iowa Nice Guy, puts out great entertaining stuff. And he is the producer of the Kinnick documentary, which will be aired at Fridley Theaters, including the Fridley Theaters in Decorah, beginning tomorrow night for a 2-week stretch. So you can learn more about probably one of the most famous Iowans in history with Niall Kinnick. And it was interesting to hear Scott talk about some future ideas and future projects that he has in the mix as well. Don't forget, we put these shows on YouTube each and every week. So we understand that you can't always be near a radio or near a streaming device at 9 o'clock on a Thursday morning, but we feel we have interesting conversations and talk to interesting people. And we want to give you the opportunity to hear those conversations on your end of things. So basically like today, you can go to YouTube, search 9-1 Our Town program. That's a good way to get it. And we put the shows and link them on all of our Facebook pages for LA Communications as well. It's just another way we cater to you in our great audience here at LA Communications. Again, thanks to our guest, thanks to our fine sponsor, Decorah Bank and Trust. Most importantly, we thank you. That's right, you, the listener, for tuning in, for logging on, or for watching Our Town on 94.9 and 99.1 The River.